R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Take out T-C-T. Sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me, zero respect. Sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me. No, just a little bit, little respect. Just a little bit. I get tired. Just a little bit. Keep on trying. Just a little bit. You're running out of food. A little bit. I ain't lying. Just a little bit. Respect me. We are home. What you say? Listen, everybody. You know there's a lot of trouble in the world. You know about the danger. There's trouble up ahead. You wanna finish up? I don't wanna finish up. I wanna live. You wanna be here tomorrow? Then you gotta be strong for our children's future. We gotta be strong. There's trouble up ahead. You wanna live tomorrow? We gotta be strong. Every one of us. We gotta be strong. To take care of this country. We gotta be strong. All the people all around. Really important. This isn't going to be the only time that people will have a chance to discuss these issues. We will host further discussions around these really important issues for our movement. Yeah. Okay. So I would like to start by recognising that tonight we're standing on stolen land, or meeting on stolen land, the land of the Wiradjeri Wurrung, the rightful sovereign owners of the land. The land was stolen, it was taken by force, and First Nations people never ceded sovereignty, and the colonisation of their land still exists today. And the struggle for First Nations sovereignty is deeply connected with the struggles against racism and border imperialism. And now, of course, we want to fight for full-on First Nations rights, substantial rights, not just token rights, especially treaty. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'll just introduce myself first. My name's Sue Bolton. I'm a member of Socialist Alliance, and I'm also a councillor at the City of Merri-bek. And probably my first First Nations protest was the 1982 land rights protests in Brisbane during the Commonwealth Games. and I've been to many protests since then. So this forum was organised by Socialist Alliance and Green Left, and we initiated this forum before Lidia left the Greens because we feel that the issues of sovereignty and treaty and First Nations justice, not just the voice, are really important for us to be discussing right now. And we invited Lidia to speak primarily because of her role in the First Nations communities. So it wasn't just that she was a Member of Parliament or just that she was a Green Senator, but also for her role and her family's role in First Nations community. And we also invited Uncle Gary Murray to speak because I've worked closely with him in the city of Merri-bek. I first met him in the campaign to save the Ballerrt Mooroop Aboriginal School from being closed down. We lost that, but now we're fighting for the land to be returned to be a First Nations community hub. But Uncle Gary has done a lot of thinking about issues about treaty and how all of these processes would work. So that's why we organised the forum. So just quickly before we start the actual speakers, just to let people know, we've got food and tea and coffee, curries over at the door, over at the side there. There are a few stalls here. People can find out a bit about Socialist Alliance and Green Left who are organising this forum. There's also a closed Dondale stall here as well, and there's also some Merri-bek activists who are not Indigenous but want to support First Nations activism, particularly in the Merri-bek area, are up the back as well, have a stall at the back. The donations tonight are simply to cover the costs. They're not to make money out of this meeting. So we're not intending to make any kind of profit out of this meeting. They're just for the running costs of the meeting. So now I'll announce the speakers. So our first speaker, Uncle Gary Murray, because of some health issues, has had to join into the meeting via Zoom. It was touch and go because he had a health issue today, but he's able to join us via Zoom tonight. So he will be speaking first. So Uncle Gary Murray is a traditional owner. He's key person in the Victorian Traditional Owners Land Justice Group. He's also a multi-clan descendant of the Wamba, the Dhudhuroa, the Wiradjeri, Yorta, Baraparapa, Djab Wurrung and the Wergaia nations. We also have Lidia Thorpe, a senator, but probably more importantly, she's from the Djab Wurrung Gunnai Gunditjmara. She's been deeply involved in the First Nations struggles for many years. So we're going to have the order of, just to tell people how we're going to run the meeting, we'll have Uncle Gary Murray to speak first, 15 to 20 minutes. Then we'll have Lidia speak for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll open the floor up for discussion. So if people have got questions, we want people to hold your questions until after the speakers have spoken. Grab a bit of notepaper. I'm sure you can find some scrap paper around at one of the stalls if you want to jot down your question and remember it. But you'll get a chance to ask questions or make comments at the end. We want an open democratic discussion. So the first speaker will be Uncle Gary Murray, who's here on Zoom, and he's played an incredible role in the First Nations struggle, and he's been someone who's been a real source of education for myself as well as many others as well. So thank you, Gary. Gary, you've got about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. Actually, it's suddenly gone off.
Hey, I'm in.
Why don't you tell Gary to start speaking? It's his turn to speak.
I've heard you. I've heard you speaking, but I'm having trouble speaking back to you. Yeah. Just start speaking. All right. Can you hear me? Hello. I don't know whether I'm talking to anybody and anybody's hearing me. Do you want me to proceed or what? This is weird.
Hey, Gary, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Yep, just start speaking.
All right, no worries. All right, good evening, everybody. You're looking good there, even if I can't see you. I'd like to pay my respects to all the First Nations in Victoria, and there are 38 First Nations, and they've all got clans and histories and language and country and all that. And my concern about the voice goes back a long way. We've heard it all before. We've seen our elders walk from Corranderk in the 1880s to complain about stuff to Parliament, and it fell on deaf ears. We've seen people walk up from Cumbregundja into Victoria, and a similar thing happened there. And we've seen the Aboriginal Development Commission, the Aboriginal Loans Commission, Partner Aboriginal Affairs. All these structures have basically gone because they failed. And why they fail is because there is a lack of self-determination in practical terms. And we see it every day in this state. And I'm only going to talk about this state, but I reckon it would apply to all the other states and territories as well. Of course, we need a national entity, but we don't need an advisory committee. That is rubbish. You know, we've been there, done that back in the 1950s and 1960s. And that's all they are, advisory committees. ATSEC, whilst it had some problems, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, I think that was on the right track. And then John Howard comes along and wipes out the body as well as the funding. And then so now, 2nd of February 2016, I'm fast forward in a bit, we had a huge statewide meeting at Zinc Conference Centre in Merri-bek, Federation Square, and 400 plus people turned up from all over the state. And the debate was about the voice, constitutional reform. And that particular statewide meeting was strongly against the voice and any constitutional reform, and wanted a treaty, wanted an elders entity, and all the nations involved in this treaty process with the state of Victoria. And that's what happened. We went on that path, February 2016, and people seem to forget it, particularly those new skin leaders that are out there running around saying they represent an act force. Well, they don't. The mandate was done in February 2016 at Fed Square, and that mandate has never been changed. We oppose the voice, oppose constitutional reform, and the latest versions of it are even worse than what was mooted back there in 2016. What we need is a sovereign entity, not necessarily put in the Constitution, probably not. And we need an entity that can avoid the Johnny Howards of the past, where it gets abolished because the political government at the time chooses to do that. We want something that is sustainable. We want something that's linked to local communities, particularly First Nations. We have 38 nations in Victoria, and they've all got different levels of operating. And I'll tell you this now, if this mob in Canberra and the elite leadership think that we're going to settle for 2 representatives, they got to be joking. You know, how is 2 reps going to represent 38 First Nations? That's impossible. And that's proven today with the First Peoples Assembly, where only 10 nations out of 38 have a seat on that assembly, compliments of the 2 co-chairs who haven't shown proper leadership, and they should be gone. They've wasted 3.5 years of taxpayers' dollars They haven't got the elders entity set up either, and they certainly haven't got 38 nations sitting in the assembly. This assembly expires probably June when the next election's on, and we hope there'll be structural challenges. But notwithstanding, we've now got the First People's Assembly, we've got the Treaty Authority being set up, we have a self-determination fund of some $60 million pumped into it as the first instalment to allow First Nations to engage experts and have meetings and the rest of it to finally draft treaties across this state. And that's really important. And my view is that what we're trying to fix up here in this state, once we got it right, it's the perfect model for perhaps the Commonwealth climate as well. I think it's really important that we recognise that, you know, our dispossession, dispersal, deculturalisation, the mass murders, the rapes, and everything else that was going on colonisation is still here with us. It's baggage we have every generation, and we have to fix this. Every day of my life, I wake up. In fact, when I was born in Baraparapa in 1951, September, it was a hot summer, and my mother and her friend my mother had to birth me on the veranda of that hospital. You know, and there was no white sheets in them days. It was just grey blankets out on the veranda with the mosquitoes and snakes and everything else, while the white mothers went inside. And that's from day one with me. And I've seen that racism and all that all my life, and I've been around 7 decades. So I've seen the politics, I've seen the people involved in it, and I think what's out there at the moment is a very dangerous elite, and we see them in our ivory towers at Melbourne Uni and even in the Assembly. And these fellows need to get sorted out. They need to come back to the people and start sorting out a proper way of doing cultural business, and that includes the political structures that we need to do. On the question of sovereignty, I think the jury's still out on that, and I won't believe no advice, because that's exactly what it is. You need to get a High Court judge or retired judges to have a look at it and make sure that our sovereignty is never ceded. And my guess is that as long as we don't cede it, it's still there. What we've got to work out is how we live it, how we practice it, and what sort of land rights we need to make sure, just like the Canadian Indians and the American Indians I visited in 1987. There was one reservation that had 900,000 acres, had its own hydro scheme, their own housing, their own tribal council and the police to enforce the law, LORE. And that to me was a concept that could work here in Victoria. And we'd obviously have to get land back to do that. And to make the point about land rights, we're just a little black dot on the map of Victoria. We haven't got much land back. We've got about 25,000 acres across the state, spread between Lake Tyers, Framingham and Camargunja in southern New South Wales, and, you know, bits and pieces with co-ops and health service and the rest of it. That's not good enough. If we're going to lift our people out of, you know, the potential of what's happening in Alice Springs, and you have to look at Alice Springs to sort of see what's bad about dispossession and dispersal and deculturalisation. You can go to Swan Hill here. You can go anywhere in one of the 35 communities around this state, and you can sort of see that we also have the socio-economic, the subcultural poverty and the rest of it. And it's really important that we address that stuff. And the only way you address that is by having First Nations clans treaties, and we still have to work out what that means. And 38 nations with 300 clans across Victoria. And by the way, it's a lot of genocide in that sort of numbers. For example, you're sitting on Wiradjeri or Wurrung country, and Wiradjeri, for example, has 7 clans, but only 2 are recognised as having descendants. So the 5 other clans, the genocide's completed them, disappeared them off this globe. And that's an indictment on colonisation even now and what's happening to us. I think it's good that councils are now starting to get involved in the treaty space. And that's what it is. It's a treaty space that's unique in Victoria. And we need to look hard at how this fits with the national scene. Nationally, we definitely need something national. We have to replace the old ATSIC, and I think we can do something better. But, you know, this issue of the advisory committee embedded in a constitution, I don't agree with one bit. I think it's a wrong move, wrong political move, and it's taken scraps from the white man's constitutional table. Thank you. Are we still talking?
Thanks, Gary.
Keep going?
Yeah.
Right. I think that the other imperative is that First Nations have to be properly resourced to do the business we're in. The business we're in, we do cultural heritage, we do native title, we do land justice, we do economic development, we provide services in health and education and housing and all that. Well, we've really got to have a good look at and review how that's operating. Senator Thorpe, stop ringing me. And the funding of First Nations, obviously, there's the $60 million in the Self-Determination Fund, but that's to build the capacity of the nations to do their treaties, negotiate their treaties with the state. And I think that's an interesting thing for Victoria. But overall, I think we need to review how we fund Aboriginal affairs in this state. There is corruption, there is nepotism, there is cronyism. We all know that. It's been there for years. And it's time we fix that up. And we might have to even look at some sort of Indigenous First Peoples Anti-Corruption Commission, for example. So that would be new. I think treaties have to have integrity. They have to have culture. They have to be professional and well organised. And I think our people are in a position here in Victoria to do that stuff. And at the moment, this voice thing is a bit of a distraction. And I think we need to get back to what the real game is. That is, start writing our treaties. Don't complain about it if you're not sitting out there drafting your family's treaties up, drafting up your clan's treaties, and drafting up your nation's treaties. And I think that's really important. We start getting our heads around what goes in a treaty. It's really straightforward. A treaty is an agreement, like a contract. And basically what would go in is it would address the question of sovereignty. What does it mean in practical terms and what sort of funding it would need? It would address the reparations question, the ongoing compensation for loss of our lands and waters, and minerals and everything else. It would address the issue of land rights and all the other things. The treaty is like a book with chapters, and there's a chapter on everything. But on our country, we have all the chapters around things like stolen gens, kids that are out of home care, and so on and so on. We need to start looking at it at the local level. We need to really look at that local scene and say, right, how is a treaty, how is anything going to fix that? And there's a lot of stuff out there that needs fixing. We're still getting deaths in custody. How bad is that? 1991 was when that report came out from the Royal Commission. And here we are, virtually 30 years later, and we're still copping deaths in custody and bad stuff like that. So I think from the point of view, treaty can work for us, but I think we've got to play it very carefully, and we've got to make sure we're on top of the game here.
Let us know.
Just one other thing, I suppose. My grandfather, Pastor Doug Nichols, there's a couple of quotes for you to think about. You can play the black notes on a piano and play the white notes, but to get harmony, you have to play both. Think about that in the context of reconciliation, race relations, and having good neighbours and the rest of it. And he also said, how can we fly like eagles when you feed us like chooks? And I think that's really important because the advisory committee is a chook. I'm done. Any questions?
So Gary, let me know when you're finished because you can't hear our main microphone.
Oh, yeah, I just finished.
Okay, no. So Gareth will be giving the speaker on the hall system. So because there's no Wi-Fi in this venue, so we've had to put
or truth without any party lines. So I'll first acknowledge the traditional owners of the country and pay my respects to the people of the Kulin Nation. I know that we have Wurrung people in the audience, so I'll particularly pay my respect to them, and I thank them for allowing us on your country and allowing every non-First Nations person in this room to benefit from being on stolen land. There's a great sacrifice that was made by Wiradjeri and Dhudhuroa and many other clans and nations across this country for people to live a nice life on our land. The only people who seem to benefit from our land are the very people who come from it. And that's the sad state of this country today. I will also want to pay my respects to particularly there's a number of beautiful elders out there, both black and white, who've been on the journey, and they know who they are, particularly from Djab, but also aren't, you know who I'm talking about. And I love you for turning up every time, because you're a constant reminder that sorry isn't good enough when we've got 22,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children still in out-of-home care today, and I see a brother over there too. Thank you, brother. And my uncle. Thank you. I feel better now. Okay, relax. I'm not going to be attacked like I have been, without people having an understanding of where I come from and what I'm saying. I've had to stop one person from coming in the room tonight because they have attacked me at a funeral, a non-Aboriginal person, questioning my motives. So I do have to be careful when I'm out in public from now on. And I want to give you a little bit of who I am. You know, I'm a grandmother. I'm 50 this year. I have 5 grandchildren, 3 children, 32, 22 and 15. And I'm the oldest of, I don't know how many, 150 cousins. So I come with responsibility. I come with the love of a mother. And I come not as an angry black woman, how they portray me as, but I have angry black women moments when I continue to see our children taken, when there's another death in custody, when there's another suicide. And just the other day I did a photo shoot, I don't know how models do it, 4 hours in the bush, and I had to tell these fellas, there's snakes in this bush. And 5 minutes later we were dodging a tiger snake. But at that time, being on country, I reflected on what's gone on, and it's been very unfair. And that's capitalism, and that's colonisation. And that's what they do to women like me. They don't know that I have, well, actually, they probably know, but they don't care that I have a family, that I'm a single mum. They just paint me as this black, angry, divisive figure that only wants peace. Like, at the end of the day, if you listen to my messaging, as Stan Grant put it, if you listen to what I say, I just want peace. I just want to unite this country like it's never been united before. I've been around for 50 years. My first job was at 14 at the Koori Information Centre in Fitzroy in Gertrude Street. I see my people begging in Gertrude Street. I saw one of my sister girls from Gippsland sleeping and begging in High Street, Northgate. It made me sick. It made me sick to the progressives out there, the gentrification, stepping over our bodies, because it's too uncomfortable to face that in a perfect life. But that's what we face every day. We don't even step over white fellas. We don't. We don't step over anybody. Where's humanity? It's ingrained in our culture. It's ingrained in the oldest constitution on the planet, and that is ours. This new constitution, it's a couple of 100 years old compared to, you know, even that's questionable. Some say 60,000, 80,000. If you look at the recent findings on my country, Gunditjmara country, it tests many, many scientific theories out there about, you know, that we come from Africa. And ludicrous, racist theories about taking away who we are as a people. And now it feels that we are begging the coloniser to allow us to be an advisory body under their complete power. And I've listened to the stories from those people that are going around doing their roadshow. And I feel like I'm at church. I feel like people are being preached to, like this is going to save our soul. It's not going to save our soul. Implementing the recommendations into the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, like you heard Uncle Gary say, that's not my work. That's 1991. That's the year my son was born. I was 17. It's my old people's work. It's the solutions to incarceration and deaths in custody. And you know, most of the recommendations they're not implementing are social factors like health and housing. There's no Medicare in prisons. There's no Medicare in prisons. And the Bringing Them Home report, we've got 22,000 kids. Two of my 5 grandkids are 2 of those kids in out-of-home care. And their parents get no support. Their parents are told, go and get yourself sorted, then you get your kids back. So parents who are struggling with what colonisation does to us every day and the racism, to get a house, to get into rehab, to find a home, to find a home. Who can find a home right now? Let alone all the support services you need to get well. So these kids have got no hope when their parents are told they've got no hope. So we're only asking to implement those recommendations. That report is 20 years old, and my own mother was a co-commissioner into the Bringing Them Home report with Sir Ronald Wilson, a well-respected white man. Him and Mum worked beautifully together to hear people's stories about being stolen. Aunt, I don't know if you were part of that one, but it's a long time ago, and we've had a lot of people pass away since then. Too many. And now they want to give us an advisory body. Well, I think that we deserve better than that. Excuse me. You know, well, excuse me. How dare I ask for better than that? How dare our people ask for better than that? You've seen what Parliament's like. We've got lunatics in there. Serious. We've got people who don't believe in climate change. We've got people who don't believe in freeing asylum seekers and refugees. This country still perpetrates genocide. Stealing children and putting them with another community is an act of genocide under the Convention. We are also guilty of torture in this country. We are not a signature to the Prevention Against Torture as a country. We don't have a human rights bill as a country. And we don't have a treaty as a country. How's my time?
You're still going okay.
Because I'm talking treaty. Treaty is real power, sovereign to sovereign. It's a negotiation for peace. It's an agreement on how we can build this country together. It's about not just being advisors. It's about having real power. We could have Senate seats as part of a treaty negotiation. It's an act of Parliament. It's a piece of legislation. It's not a referendum. If Labor was so hand on heart, I want to help the blackfellas or the Aborigines, implement the recommendations, legislate Senate seats for every state and territory, give us 3% of the GDP. That'll be later, but, you know, it's a nice thought. 3% of the GDP means no welfare for our mob. It's just paying the rent for all the stolen wealth that gets ripped out of our Mother Earth, pollutes our skies, kills our totems. A treaty is about peace, and we can do that. We don't have to wait like they say, oh, that's years down the track. That's a stalling tactic. Just like Labor are stalling the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I got stabbed in the back on the UNDRIP for this country by Labor. They went to the Libs and stabbed me in the back on my own private senator's bill to introduce the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I was horrified, and I was really disappointed in Patrick Dodson for throwing me under the bus to the Liberal Party, to be quite honest. And I told him I was disappointed because he's known me since I was a girl. So when you walk into that environment and you have someone like that do that to you, that hurt. I expect it from Pauline Hanson or, you know, one of those kind. But that's what's going on in there. Don't be fooled. Hawke wanted a treaty. Keating was good. Hawke was stopped from having a treaty in this country by his right-wing Labor counterparts. And they wanted to settle for less. And what is less? I ask you all today, go and look where the voice comes from. Go and look where constitutional recognition comes from. And you'll find that you're sitting with mining magnates, you're sitting with John Howard, Julian Lisa, all the corporate mining, corporate big shots like Qantas. That's who you're siding with. And I think, just think about that. That should surely get your conscience thinking, maybe I need to find out a bit more, because it's not up for me do your research. You have to do that. I'm on my own now. I don't have a big party to back me anymore. I didn't have one to back me on our sovereignty. So it's me. No money, back to the drawing board as a black sovereign movement. And if you want real justice for blackfellas in this country, stop being the hand on heart thinking that you're doing the right thing as so-called allies. I'm not asking you to vote no, and I'm not asking you to vote yes. I'm asking you to think very seriously about what you're agreeing to and what you think is best for us when you hear from the grassroots it's something completely different. And Victorian treaty is exactly that. And Uncle Gary spoke about the 10 nations out of 38 in Victoria. How long have we been talking treaty in Victoria? We only have 10 nations out of 38. Treaty in Victoria is not the model to go by for this country because it excludes people. And while we're fighting amongst ourselves about who gets at the table, what's the Premier of logging and extinction doing? What's he doing? He's cutting down the forest. He's cutting down the forest. And are those nations at the table? No. He's destroying everything we have left before we negotiate the treaty around the table. He's drilling, he's cutting trees, he's killing totems. And one of the other negotiation points of a treaty is Crown land. And Crown land should be for all of us, particularly the people whose land it is. But when it's handed over to TOs, it will be here forever. It will be our green spaces. But what's the Premier of extinction and logging and selling off public housing doing? He's getting rid of all the Crown land. So it's, you know, the poor white fellas and the poor black fellas are at it again. Well, I've had enough. And when I see my old public housing units being demolished, and the memories I have in those, the safety I had in those as a black single mum, that is being destroyed. And treaty can be a solution to that as well. We need to think about treaty as a blank canvas. Stop thinking about how treaties have been broken around the world. Yes, they have been broken. But we have a blank canvas. We can rewrite the Constitution with a treaty in this country. We can make it fairer for everybody, so everyone does have a home, so that we're not locking up innocent people who come here for safety, and that we unite on all of those fronts. So I think I've gone well over time, but I'll leave it to questions, and thank you very much for having me here.
Thanks for that, Lydia. And I would actually, from the chair, like to congratulate you and the Invasion Day protest organisers for opening up a bigger debate, because, you know, obviously Lydia has a big profile as a senator, and if it wasn't for Lydia and also the Invasion Day protests, there'd probably be a lot of people who wouldn't realise how little is being offered by the government. So I think that's been really important to open up this debate, because as we know, the history of social movements for every exploited group has always been one where you fight for what you need. You don't just fight for piecemeal little bits that politicians might be prepared to offer you as sops. So, I think every single social movement has, that's our experience from when we win serious change. Now, I don't know if Uncle Gary is still with us. This is a bit annoying, the fact that the two systems are not with us. I'm hoping Uncle Gary can hear the discussion and participate in the discussion. So the way we're going to run the discussion is we're going to take it on rounds of 3 with 2 to 3 minutes per person. People can make comments or ask questions, but so we can share the time around, we're going to try and limit it to 2 to 3 minutes, so we don't get bogged down with any one particular person. We want to hear from lots of different people, and we want a bit of a two-way discussion. We want to have an open and democratic discussion, but we're hoping people focus the discussion around First Nations issues rather than necessarily the Greens. And I know maybe there might be 1 or 2 questions long about the Greens, but in reality we organise this forum to discuss the topics that are advertised: sovereignty, treaty, First Nations, justice. And, Socialist Alliance and Green Left decided to organise this meeting because we felt there needed to be more forums for people like Lydia and Uncle Gary to be able to talk with people, because also a lot of people have questions about how a treaty process might work, questions about what sovereignty means. So we'd need an open and comradely forum in which to be able to have those discussions. So I might intersperse a couple of questions of myself into the discussion, but I don't intend to dominate the discussion with questions like, whatever it is, Michael Robinson or whatever his name was, that sort of interviewing. I won't interview the speakers. So if people could put their hands in the air if they'd like to ask a question, and I'll take 3 speakers. I'll try and prioritise First Nations speakers, but I won't recognise everybody. Oh, so there's an echo. Okay. Yeah, okay. 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 I don't know how to fix that. I don't know. Okay, a tech team's going to see if they can work out a way of fixing this. It's very annoying. Okay. Okay, we're back to this point. Could people put their hands in the air if they've got questions? And, yeah. Okay. So I've got Leonie here, followed by, I don't know your name, and followed by Dom, and I'll take those 3, and then I'll get a response from speakers, and I'll take another round of 3. So you won't miss out. We'll just take people in turns. Thanks. Actually, can people get the roving mic? I'll just be loud. Do you want to come up here just until the roving mics come? I can repeat the question. Yeah.
I think I should be on tech. Is that all right? Not too loud? Sounds really loud to me. Why were the Labor parties closer? You're talking about the Labor Party not going with the UN declaration. What was the what was the reason behind it? Did they ever tell you, or was it like an attack on you? You say yes, they say no. Like, what happened for Patrick Dodson to act in that way? The next question was based on the referendum and the voice. Just how you're going to proceed on the voice and the referendum.
We'll take 3 and then we'll respond. So, yeah,
Can people come up to there? The sound quality is much better on this, so it's better to use this than...
Okay, this is a bit better than the roving mic. Sorry. Okay, she'll give it to you just.
Yeah, no worries. Hello, Lydia. We met a few weeks back. Oh, beautiful, beautiful, yes. So me and Lydia met at the Palestinian Solidarity Conference, and she made some big claims, you know? And I don't follow Australian politics anymore, to be honest, but I was hearing something. I saw Lidia Thorpe on my news app. I checked it, and I'm like, did she do it? And I'm like, oh, she did it, you know? And what I want to say about this is, Lydia, what you did, towing your own line, standing with principles because you will not waver or falter or be tripped over your own principles, that in itself is a mark of a legacy which is impenetrable, which will be remembered and will be respected. No matter what these people say about you, the white liberals, truly, none of these other people will be remembered because they waver and they're like paper in the wind. But for a person to stand up for their principles and say it proudly in front of anyone, no matter who it is, that is mark of not a principled person only, but a leader. I hear a lot of things, what you're saying, and I find so much in common with you in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Particularly about the part when Malcolm X was talking about the white liberal. The irony of all ironies. I want to ask you, for you, despite the legacy, that's a guaranteed for you. For you, what is driving you personally, not on a political level, cultural level, personally, to fight for what's yours? What is driving you to do that? To fight for what's yours and what you know in your heart is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. So I've got Dom next, and then I'll take another round after, get a response from the speakers. So I've got Dom next, and then see who else wants to speak.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to ask both speakers. Okay, I face the audience? Okay. I just wanted to ask both speakers if they'd given any thought to how do I phrase this? Like, how the nature of Australia's sort of historically exploitative relationship with Britain and the historical narrative around that could be undermined or reworked in reference to how do you say it? Putting forward a more Indigenous-centric view of Australian history and the development of colonisation and our relationship with Britain in that regard.
Okay. Now, I've just been advised that for the live stream we need to stand here. Is that right? And I think this is a better microphone than the roving mics, I understand. So it's not a great hall for sound, this hall. It was built for army drills or whatever it was built for. Uncle Gary, did you hear any of those questions? I'm not sure if you're hearing from this microphone. But might have to try and start to, in the next round, type some of the questions into the chat. I might ask Lydia to speak first, and then I'll see what Uncle Gary can hear.
Thanks, Sue. Thank you for your questions. Yeah, that's okay. It's all right. So just getting back to those questions. So Dodson on the UNDRIP, well, I've been given no reason why Labor would want to stall the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I don't think that they would like, I mean, my personal view is that they wouldn't like us to move on the UNDRIP before the voice, because as it stands, the voice doesn't meet the UNDRIP. Free, prior and informed consent, self-determination, the right to establish our own representation based on our clans and nations and our cultural responsibilities. So it hasn't been tested yet, but if there's anyone out there, because as a poor independent, there's a lot more areas where the UNDRIP is basically not taken into account, and it actually impinges on our rights as Indigenous people, the voice, in how that they've operated without the clans, without the nations, there's no consent, and that our rep bodies, who are funded by the Labor government, are just that, you know, and that's sad. When our Aboriginal services were set up in the 60s and 70s, and I know there's people in the room that were part of the establishment of those services, it was based on the principles of self-determination. And these days, a lot of our services, unfortunately, have had to toe the line with government to get the funding that they require to provide the welfare service to the blacks. And that's all their job is, right? And to get into an organisation, you need to be a corporate member, and you have to pay your corporate fee, $2 or whatever the organisation says you've got to pay. And if you don't pay your $2 on time, then you can't get into the meeting. This happens right across the country in native title, in our own Aboriginal health, not so much our health services, but in some of our community services out there. Health services are probably the safest. They've tried to maintain the narrative of self-determination, but they too have been corporatised to an unacceptable standard in this country, where our Aboriginal holistic way of health and well-being, which takes in land, takes in water, takes in totems, takes in language, takes in dance. You don't see that when you walk into an Aboriginal medical service. You see a white doctor, usually a white nurse, and lots of sick black people with the same chronic illnesses. The same. And I was one of the first babies in the first Victorian Aboriginal health service in Fitzroy that my grandmother helped set up. And she worked for nothing as a CEO. You don't get that these days. These CEOs get paid more than senators, believe me, particularly in Victoria. How to proceed on the voice? Well, we've got to hold them to accountable. We've got to hold them to account. Like, the recommendations, it's like no one is listening. They're listening, but they're not hearing. I don't know. But why aren't people calling for the end to deaths in custody by implementing those recommendations? Why won't Elbow do that? Why won't Dodson support that? I don't know. Oh, well, Malandiri says, it's a state and territory responsibility. But if you can get every premier around the table from around the country to say they support voice, why can't you get them to do that for implementing the Royal Commission on Deaths in Custody? It's so frustrating. They could say, hey guys, they're all white people that are making decisions for us. I'm not sure if what the NT one, so don't get me for that one. Special Minister. I hope they're not, if they're Aboriginal, great. But if we got all of those together, we could have a shopping list. Deaths in custody, child removal, UNDRIP, and raise the age of legal responsibility in this country to 14. I mean, 14's just low even. Should be 16, but if we can get all those people together that apparently make the decisions collectively, then it's not too much to ask. We've had campaign after campaign, 30 years, 20 years of the same thing. So that's my answer on that. I'll quickly hurry up now. So what drives me to fight for what's mine? Brother, they were beautiful words you said, and it's exactly what you said and your solidarity that keeps me strong, you know, and standing with your mob, standing with my mob, and knowing what my old people died fighting for in this country is enough to keep me going. Even though there are days where I don't want to keep going, I have that ancestral strength in my blood and bones, and the solidarity from people like yourself. So I won't stop until we get real justice. I've been on advisory bodies. I've sat on the Ministerial Women's Advisory when I was at Lake Tyers, you know, just kind of coming out. They do nothing. The Parliament will have complete supremacy over that advisory body. They will decide whether to take advice or not. And I think that's disrespectful for those people who are either handpicked or elected to that committee, because they're not going to be taken seriously. And just on the British relationship, we need a treaty. The King needs to come to the table. We don't settle for anything less. We want our country back. We want our land back. We need it now more than ever. We're in a climate catastrophe. Colonisation has got us to the climate catastrophe we're in today. It wasn't us who destroyed our own land. So the King has got a lot to answer for with his new things that he owns. But I never swore allegiance to the King, and I never swore allegiance to the Queen. I swore allegiance to her hairs. So thank you.
Now, we're just going to see if Uncle Gary would like to respond to any of the questions. Hi, Uncle Gary, can you hear me now? Did you hear any of the questions? Think the live stream and the Zoom are counteracting each other. Yes. Yes, we can. Can you type yes? Yeah. 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 Go, Gary. Yeah. We. Yeah.
Thousand Aboriginal corporations and co-ops and associations and whatnot to insert it into their rule book so that we promote it. It should definitely be included in the treaty space in Victoria.
Go, Gary.
Yeah. Well, on UNDRIP, I think it's really important that First Nations include all the conventions into their structures, and we just got to push it into treaty space. Did you get that? Aboriginal corporations and co-ops and associations and whatnot, to insert it in their rule book so that we promote it. It's definitely being included in the treaty space, is it correct? No, Gary. Yeah. Well, under it, I think it's really important that First Nations include all the conventions into their structures, and we just got to push it in the treaty space. You get that? Aboriginal corporations and co-ops, to insert it in their rule book so that we promote it. It's definitely being included in the treaty space, is it correct?
We might have to do something like getting Gareth to answer the questions in the chat box. So we might have to do 500 questions. But while we wait for the 500 questions, I might find the next group. So I've got this man here, the glass and the floral shirt. I've got John Yorta, who was represented up earlier, and there was a man with the glass off the track and a blue shirt. Yeah, there's actually, can you come up here? Or it's better to come up here with the glass it's right and right.
The information they've given us and show my respect. My question is, I'm intrigued to know what your response would be to an assertion made by Marcia Langton, amongst others, that really what's required for the treaty negotiations to proceed is a very complex network of advisory committees going from the local level right through to state level and up eventually to federal level, so that the federal voice shouldn't be seen as something sort of on its own, but more as a sort of an apex of a network of sort of the model, I suppose, for something that goes right through the Australian society from the small to the big. And that sort of required something like that, a very complex relationship of committees or, I don't know, assemblies is required for a really proper treaty negotiation, self-determination negotiation to occur. So, yeah, that's my question.
Thank you. So, John?
I just want to, first of all, congratulate you for the courageous stance that you've taken. I came to Australia as a young teenager, and I remember being at school and realizing when I was about 15 that there was a total absence, this is in the 60s, towards the late 60s, of any positive images or any images at all of Aboriginal people or any stories. And I came from a Holocaust survivor family, so I immediately identified, once the various bus rides and other things started, with what was going on in this country to Aboriginal people. What appalls me right now is the type of extreme racism that exists with deaths of Aboriginal people in custody. Today on the way here, I read that Paluschak, you know, the Premier of Queensland, is now drafting laws which will incarcerate younger and younger Aboriginal people. And yeah, okay, so this is the kind of, I think we've got to focus on these things. And, you know, I think the genocide is still continuing in this country. There is no question about it.
Thanks. Ryan.
Thank you, Senator Thorpe, and to Uncle Gary Murray. Hopefully you get a chance to answer my question as well. Myself and many members in this room would consider our politics to be socialist. I wanted to ask each of you, how would you understand and reflect on the 100 years of history between the movement for First Nation sovereignty and the movement for socialism? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll now get responses from the speakers. No, I'll take you in the next round. Yeah, I'll go in the next round. That's okay. Everyone will get a turn, don't worry. So we'll hear from the speakers and also for people who found the sound issues very frustrating with not being able to hear Uncle Gary, we are going to be doing a podcast with Uncle Gary and we'll make that widely distributed. So people will get a chance to hear him a bit more.
Thanks, Sue. Thank you again for your questions. And the first one on assertion of that Marcia Langton has come out with in terms of the treaty networks and the complexities around local, state and federal representation through a treaty process. The only people who can make a decision for a treaty are those that it affects. And in Victoria, we have 38 nations. We have to go to 38 nations to talk about treaty because those nations are made up of many clans. So for example, Gunnai country, my country, has got 5 clans. So it's up to that nation to bring those clans together and discuss what they want that will bring them peace. I can't self-determine for Yorta country what is best for them. They have to determine that through their kinship ties to country and ensuring that every family clan is participating or has a head of the family at the table. And only my family decides who the head of my family is. Only my family decides who, when I become an elder. I don't just come out when I turn 50, 60, 70, 80 and say I'm an elder. It's my family that says I'm an elder. No one else can do that. And that's another thing, you know, this eldership is being bastardised by government and it's being colonised because it's putting up people that are self-professed leaders, self-professed elders, but they don't have that, they don't have what a lot of our elders have. And that is knowledge, that is respect, and that is the struggle and the fight, hey. So their model is not that much different to the ATSIC model, which was not a bad structure because it did have not so much local, but it had regional representation that went up to a national body. And obviously that was, you know, that had its flaws, but it was also a powerful force that the government was afraid of. So we should also think about the history of ATSIC and what that did for our people at that time, because they put treaty on the table. They didn't put constitutional recognition on it. In fact, ATSIC came out with the original information and documentation on treaty. And I took those booklets to the meeting in Yulara, which they're saying was at Uluru, but the meeting was at Yulara. And I said, let's not reinvent the wheel, you know, let's look at this. Let's look at what ATSIC did around treaty, which says treaty comes first, then constitutional recognition, and no one wanted to look at those old books. No one wanted to talk about treaty. It was all about how we're going to either enter the constitution or change the constitution. And I was part of that sovereignty movement who said, well, hang on, we can't go into any colonial constitution until we understand the implications of sovereignty. And so I know that you've all heard all the big shots coming out, all the colonial Westminster legal experts saying, no, they don't cede sovereignty. It says it in the colonial constitution that we're under. Hello? That's like, I don't know, the first thing that comes to my mind is like cops investigating cops, you know? It's a bit like that. So it doesn't make sense. We should be fighting for a treaty. Yorta Yindi made a song that everyone danced for. You know, we've been talking about it for decades and decades and decades. We had 1 million people walk over the bridge in the name of reconciliation. What was a reconciliation priority in 2000 when I was pregnant with my 22-year-old? Or 23 now. Treaty. This is only 5 years old, this constitutional stuff, this voice, and prior to that it was you, me, recognise, and prior to that was recognise campaign. So millions and millions and millions of dollars have already been spent on getting us, trying to get us into the constitution. And I know you'll first thing will come to your mind is 67 referendum. Oh, but you know, you went in there, you got laws made for you in 67 and you fought hard for that. There was a sovereign black movement that didn't want the 67 referendum to happen either. It's what you don't hear about out there. Our people did not march for a toothless tiger of advisors to a parliament who have no respect for our people in this country. And that goes to show with the evidence. Deaths in custody, child removal. Keep saying the same thing until it changes. Thank you.
Okay, so Uncle Gary has left the room, so I'll take 3 more speakers, and I've got this man here, I've got this woman here, and then I've got Sue.
I'd like to thank the conveners of the meeting for having this democratic discussion. Sorry. Yep. The big questions that have been presented today are about the treaty, the voice, and the attitude of the Aboriginal population and the working class to what's going to happen. My name's Will Marshall. I'm a teacher from the western suburbs in Footscray High School. I'm a member of the Socialist Equality Party. I think Aboriginal people have suffered the most degrading conditions possible over decades. Housing, health, anything you want to name is just totally abominable. They've endured the most degraded conditions, and the last thing I read was Veronica Nelson. I don't know if people have seen that, but a woman who was sent to prison for shop stealing, dies in prison, totally neglected, totally unnecessary. It just made me feel sick to think of it. You go, because you've got a heroin addiction, you steal something, and then you die. The Socialist Equality Party, as I said, the party I'm in, we oppose the voice. We're not opposing it from the right-wing standpoint, but like the apology of 15 years ago, we know it's going to do nothing to resolve the horrendous conditions that people are living in. 17,000 Indigenous children are living in out-of-home care compared with about 9,000 a decade ago. It's just offensive. I thought I was allowed to speak. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I'm being asked to wind up. Look, we oppose the Voice because Labor's giving itself a gloss, trying to present itself as progressive while it implements war, while it implements COVID, you know, open... What? Can I ask the meeting that I speak for one more minute, please?
No, I just announced at the very beginning 2 to 3 minutes. So, thank you. Who is the next person?
Anyway, look, we're against the Voice and we are against the treaty, which will do the same thing.
Thanks, Linda. So, I've been protesting for 30 years. I can't take it anymore. I can barely live in this country anymore. I want to know what we can do. I was with Yoko Yindu yesterday, holding them in my arms where they sobbed. We were backstage holding each other and we couldn't stop crying because everybody is asleep in this country. We can't even get the date changed, let alone anything else. What can we do? How do we wake people up? What's something we can really do to get people moving? I'm at Melbourne University. I have a voice. I have a big voice. I'm ripping up flags. I'm burning flags. I'm doing whatever I can with the flag. I'm not stopping, but I'm alone. Yesterday, there was 50,000 people watching Yoko Yindi and no one was doing jack shit. They didn't even listen to the song. I don't know what we're going to do, but I need some help. I want to help you, and I certainly don't want to move out of this country, but I can't take it anymore. I'm breaking, and I don't know how you cope. And holding those men last night in my arms and seeing them sob and thinking, what the fuck is wrong with Australia? How can't we do something here? This is all bullshit. We just need to do something. We can't vote. We can vote. We can't vote. It's not going to work. Can you lead us, or can someone help us to rise up, because it's not working? I have never seen young people so asleep in all my life. I have a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old. I couldn't even get them to come here. Where are the young people? I was protesting from 16, 17. There's nobody here. My question is, but one, look at this. Where the fuck's Melbourne University? Where's RMIT? Where are they? I'm not interested in politics. I'm interested in how the fuck we get change, because I do not want to die and not see this. I can't believe Uncle Roachy had to die without seeing treaty. I can't believe it. I am grieving so heavily. I would like to know what you think we can do.
Thank you. Thank you. Sue.
Thank you. And Lydia, thank you, because I think you've been very brave in what you've done, and I think everybody here supports you for that reason. And I really thank everybody here for the chance for people on the left and progressives to actually have this discussion, because it's really hard to have it out there. It's actually been hard for people to get a hearing, but Invasion Day in Melbourne had 30,000 people at it, and 70 to 80% of them were young people. So I don't feel quite as depressed as you're feeling. So we've got to start somewhere. So it has to start somewhere. So this is my question. So I've got a question. Yeah, but let's just start with the things that we can do. So this is my question. I think treaty is critical for all the reasons that you're saying. And it's very clear that the Voice is tokenistic, you know, at best. At best, it's tokenistic. But what I do worry about, and this is the thing that sort of is worrying at the moment, is that I think that there's the whole discussion about the Voice is stirring up a right wing that's racist, and you hear what the Nationals, you know, like you look at this position that the Nationals, and of course today the Country Liberal Party, it's quite frightening. So my question is this: if we do see the stirring of a racist right wing over this debate, do you feel that it would actually be demoralising for a lot of First Nations people if the voice went down? This is a tactical question, really, and it's one that we can't really answer yet. But I do worry that tactically opposing the voice, if the right wing really comes up, would actually lead to demoralisation, and I don't think we can afford that. So they're the sort of interesting questions that face us when you look at Invasion Day and how many people turned up. So there's a genuine, really fascinating discussion to be had about how we see this process through. So thank you.
Okay, over to Lydia, and then I'll take another round of three.
Okay, so that was two, right? Two questions? I'm just keeping up. Okay, so first one, what can we do? And I feel you. In fact, I used to feel like that. I felt helpless, hopeless. You know, too many times in my life I felt like that, to be honest. And I still see hope. I know that, you know, our mother is talking. Our country, this earth, is talking to us in a way that it never has before. And you see what's going on around the world. This whole planet needs healing. And we can't give up. We've got to keep fighting. You know, my Gunditjmara mob, 70 clans once roamed Gunditjmara country, Garawerd, and we have 7 clans left. 63 wiped off the face of the earth. And as a descendant and a survivor of strong matriarchal blood, I have a responsibility to my land and my people and the people around me. Everybody, we all have a responsibility to each other, and that's what gives me hope. And the fact that I do see lots of young people, I know they're not as motivated. I mean, you know, my 15-year-old sleeps till lunchtime. But I tell you what, when she gets fired up, she gets fired up. And so does my 22-year-old. But they dip in and dip out because it's too traumatic. It's hard. It's hard being on the front line every single day of your life. And when they've seen their mother and grandmother and uncles and aunties on this heavy front line, they're just like, I just want to go and hang out with my mates and be happy. So we do need to get a lot of young people involved, but it's got to, we've got to do it in a way where they're the ones telling young people, you know? They're sick of being told by us what to do. That's the problem with this country. Imagine young people, imagine them climate activists running the country. That's our parliament. That's what our parliament should be made up of. Good young people with good brains and who want to look after our land and water and care for our old people. That's our law. So I have hope, and I will do what I can to get as many invitations. I mean, we don't have the budget to, as I said, fly around and do all these events, but I'll certainly rock up to an event at any university at any time with a room full of young people and have a yarn. I'll always make myself available for that, and my staff member Dan, put your hand up, has brought a list, contact, if you can give your details to Dan if you want to stay ahead of what we're doing, because I don't have a contact list anymore. When I left the Greens, all my lists went, so I'm basically back to absolute basics. So I need an army. We need an army. We need to connect all the movements: climate, refugee, forest. We need to connect all of the movements, women's movements, young people's movements. That is what this country should be about, justice for all of those groups. And if we come together, no one can stop us. And that's what I look forward to. In terms of a yes. In terms of a yes or no outcome, yes, it will. It's going to hurt us. It's hurting us now. It's dividing families. It's dividing communities. People are saying, oh, you know, I support it, Lydia, no offence. I was like, that's okay, babe, you know. Do you know what you're supporting? No, but, you know, I've been told to support it because it's going to save our culture and language. The way it's been sold is sad. It's misleading. And if my people want to vote for it, then they should vote for it. They have the self-determining right to do that. And if the racists get hold of it and run a good campaign, well, I think it's a point in time in this nation where we're going to see the racists expose themselves, and we'll have an idea of what percentage of racists we have to deal with. I mean, we know, you know, part of Queensland is definitely a part where we need to focus on. It's hurting now. If it's a no vote, it's going to hurt. And I don't think Labor's ready for that. I don't think the mental health supports, given they're not there now, I don't think they're going to be available for our people. And if it's a yes, then we'll continue to fight for justice. It'll be back to this drawing board of then talking to an advisory body with no power and saying, please, can you ask the government to implement the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody? Please, can you ask the government to do all the things we've been fighting for? That, you know, what are they going to tell them that's anything new? So that's it. That's it, I think. I covered that. Thank you.
So I'll take another round of 3 and then we'll see how we're going for time. I've got Chris, then I've got a comrade with a black mask on, and then I've got Jacob.
On the question of black deaths in custody, the coroner's finding in relation to Veronica Nelson, he recommended bail reform, that is, make it easier for people to get bail so they're not put in jail, and so that if they're not put in jail, they're not going to die in jail. So that now the Victorian government says they'll consider it, but they don't seem to be in all that much of a hurry. That's my impression. I could be wrong, but they don't seem to see it as something urgent. So my suggestion would be to that the Aboriginal movement should organise a large rally outside Parliament to demand that this be done if they seem to be dragging their feet. And the same could apply throughout Australia to other states as well, to organise large rallies to demand the implementation of the recommendations of the Royal Commission of Black Deaths in Custody and the Veronica Nelson coroner's report.
Yeah, I'd just first like to thank Uncle Gary and Lydia for your talks. I thought it was really, really cool. As a Bundjalung and Gamilaroi man, I really resonate with like what you say in terms of how Indigenous oppression is occurring today. It's horrible what's happening under this brutal state of Australia. Like, you know, with you, Lydia, you talked about the inaccessible housing conditions, you know, the terrible healthcare, the violent prisons that destroy Indigenous life and so forth. It's a horrendous situation. And combine that with the proposal of voice, it is a bit of a natural ask covering for Labor to say, look, here's what we're doing, we're looking out for you guys and so forth, which is actually not the case really. It brings a really important question, I feel, about the kind of strategy in terms of achieving Indigenous justice and self-determination and so forth, whether or not we do it from the top down or do we go from the bottom up in terms of grassroots strategies. So for one instance, I've been investigating a lot in terms of the Black Power movement in Redfern, with the likes and legends of like Gary Foley, Paul Coe, Isabel Coe, and so forth. That didn't take a backward step. They kind of took a principled stance and said, we're not going to be able to achieve self-determination by sucking up to the governments of that time and of the future generations that we are living under today. You know, the awesome links that they took in terms of connecting the Builders Labourers Federation, fighting for public housing, building Aboriginal housing companies and so forth, link up the South African apartheid team in terms of fighting against the rugby team where they actually sawed off the goalposts, protested them, like awesome actions and so forth. But they also did incredible things like, you know, doing the Aboriginal Tent Embassy protests, one of the most imaginative and creative land rights demonstration. They said, we want land rights. We don't want, you know, native title or like a little bit of land here and there, little pockets. No, we want land rights, actual established land rights. So I guess my question for you, Lydia, is like, you know, you've been involved in politics for quite a long time and in different protests and struggles and so forth. Is there kind of like a particular protest or campaign movement that you've been involved in that you'd like to see that being replicated today in terms of addressing these questions of Indigenous oppression and maybe what we could do today in terms of like, do we achieve Indigenous justice? There's a lot, I guess, to jam-packed into there, but yeah, maybe like a story or like a campaign that you're part of and what's the inspiration from that, so.
Great, thanks. Jacob.
Well, thanks everyone, and thanks Lydia, Lydia and Gary. I think it's been a very great kind of discussion, and I've been loving hearing all the speakers and contributions. Now, I'm going to start off by, my question is going to be sort of framed by, I actually wrote an article about Lydia responding to her resignation from the Greens for Green Left with Sue, and I guess the kind of opening kind of point I kind of made was Lydia's resignation from the Greens kind of represented a bit of, I guess, an opening, especially in terms of the role that Lydia has played up to this point in terms of building a stronger independent First Nations movement for change. And of course, quoting Lydia directly herself, when she resigned from the Greens, she said directly that she wants to grow and amplify the Black sovereign movement. And I guess I want to hear from Lydia, what does that practically look like? And I guess, you know, do you see yourself playing a role of actually uniting all the different grassroots Indigenous communities across the country?
Just quickly before Lydia responds, we've got a question on live stream from First Nations activist in Perth, Marianne McKay, who's been involved in a lot of campaigns. Marianne, yeah. I think the message has gone off. Back to the... Okay. Marianne is asking, can Lydia give a quick version of what the voice encompasses for people who don't know? Like, for example, what will the voice and constitutional recognition do for social justice issues?
Thank you, and nice to hear that Sister Marianne's online. She's a deadly activist in WA with a mob of kids doing a law degree and an incredible activist in her own right. Where will I start? I suppose the Black sovereignty movement. Well, it's a movement that I was born into. It's a movement that I didn't know was a movement until I became old enough to realise it was a movement, and it was the Black Power movement. and Redfern were partnering up with Fitzroy Blacks, and Foley was running up and down the line between Victoria and New South Wales. And there were meetings in Gertrude Street, Fitzroy, in the Builders Arms, when we didn't have services, and that's where the black activism came. That's when Muhammad Ali came to see us. I sat on his knee at the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service, and it was in the Black Power movement days. So it's who I am. I don't know anything else, and there are so many black sovereign mob around this country that don't have a voice. In all my roles that I've had, I did some work. I've done work as, consultancy around the country on climate and environment and trying to decolonise that movement. And, that was something in itself. But going and visiting mob around the country made me realise that they don't have a seat at the table. When their country's being logged, no one cares. When their water's being poisoned, no one cares. And these fellas are, like Deebing Creek, when I went there, they just had 2 tents. And they've got some display home place coming in to just put their houses on a burial site. Like, who cares? So that's what mob are dealing with right across this country. And they're the people that, yes, I want to bring together. And when I get an invitation to meet with the Prime Minister, I'm waiting for an invitation to go and meet with the referendum group and their working groups and the Prime Minister. He hasn't responded yet. Time's ticking and the journos are asking every day has he responded. But that's an invitation to the black sovereign movement. So when you talk about the Gary Foleys and the Andersons and the Murrays and the Mansells and the Irene Watsons and Auntie Jenny Munro, who's in hospital recovering from being unwell, she's part of the workout group. This is the grind that they put on the hardcore black women that held the front line. Still poor, still struggling, but still holding the front line. And I'm sick of seeing our people struggle to hold the front line, particularly our women. And if I can use this platform to bring those people together, meet with the Prime Minister, meet with the working group, demand justice, real justice, then, if I can do that single-handedly as a senator, then that will mean a lot to our people, and hopefully they can hear from real grassroots people about the actual atrocities happening in their communities instead of the peak bodies who haven't been around in communities for a little while. There's, a lot of our peak bodies haven't visited a community for a long time. A lot of these bureaucrats don't even go into a community. They fly in, fly out. They don't know what it's like to live there. So that's what I want to bring to Parliament. And in terms of, I forgot the last bit, I've just got voice written there, and it was the last question. Mary Ann was, what can I say about the voice? Well, that it's been orchestrated for a number of years, and that there's an organisation called Uphold and Recognise. This was established prior to the Uluru meeting or the Yalara meeting. I went to the launch of that organisation and the lovely book that they put out, Uphold and Recognise. And Noel Pearson and Mundine, what's his name? Warren, were launching the lovely book on Uphold and Recognise while we had a convoy of black grassroots activists on their way to Yalara to boycott that meeting. And that booklet is what we're dealing with today. And that launch happened at the Melbourne Law School in front of a bunch of white lawyers. And I got word of that meeting at the last minute, so I rocked up looking like as white lawyerish as I could in a suit and called them out. I called out the whole group, and we were meant to go to questions that time, and they cut questions because they knew I was in the room and they knew that they were doing the wrong thing. That's where the whole voice, constitutional recognition stuff comes from. It's a conservative idea. It's supported by the Liberal Party. It was had John Howard's support back then. So don't be fooled, learn the truth. And that's why, you know, we thought truth might be the priority for this country, not voice. We thought it'd be great for everyone to learn the truth of the country before we go into their constitution, but obviously that wasn't important enough for everybody else. And treaty was to bring you constitutional recognition through a more comprehensive, meaningful yarn with clans and nations, but again, we got railroaded on that again. So I think that's it, hey? Thank you all very much.
So we could have time for one more question, otherwise I can wrap up the meeting now with a few final comments. Has anyone got a burning question you want to ask, or?
I'm actually talking to the Republicans about them not moving without having treaty. We can't go to a republic without a treaty. Otherwise, who's going to be the new power? Not us. Not us. We're not there if we don't have a treaty. So we need a treaty. Then we have a republic. And I've also sent a letter to the Queen, the King. Sorry, I'm tired. Requesting his presence for a discussion about a treaty in this country.
So, a lot of people here would be aware that the only way you can achieve serious change, and I think Lydia has sort of alluded to it in her discussion tonight, is through a movement on the streets outside of Parliament. And the role that Lydia's playing is amplifying the voice of the streets, the voice of the grassroots, because there's only so far you can go with negotiations in Parliament. The only way you can actually change the balance of forces is through mobilisation. And that means we do need structures, we do need campaign organisations, we need to stay in touch, because we do need to unite the movements around change, and especially around First Nations justice and treaty. And we also, I think, we don't want the voice to push all of these issues off the agenda. Over 30 years, and they haven't implemented the recommendations of the Royal Commission into deaths in custody. Over 30 years. So we know that just praying and begging doesn't work. However many years, I can't remember, since, you know, the Bring Them Home report, and those recommendations, a couple of decades, haven't been implemented. And we all saw during the COVID crisis those white vans pull into Wilcannia because there was no fucking housing. It's not, this is not a newly discovered issue. Like, okay, you might understand if it was just suddenly the houses just vanished. But we've known this for decades about overcrowded housing. There's no excuse. The government could act now, voice or no voice, regardless of people's position on a voice. So what, sorry?
Add to that, you don't need a referendum for a treaty. and you don't need a referendum to have seats in Parliament. So we look at what's going on in the Northern Territory. You know, if family clans had a voice, we wouldn't be seeing what we're seeing. But it's the peak bodies and the government that are railroading, deciding what is best for our people, and that has to stop.
Thanks. Very, very true. Because it's that bureaucratisation and bureaucratic approaches which don't work. You need to be in touch. So basically, coming out of this meeting, we do want to stay in touch. Not all of the structures exist. I know that Lydia and people in her office are trying to recreate contact lists that they lost when Lydia left the Greens. We also took up, if you didn't sign it, you're welcome to sign it. There's also a registration list if you want to stay in touch at the door. We have to work out what we're going to do practically to support these campaigns. And also, if you're in touch with Socialist Alliance, and please stay in touch, we will also try and do our best to put people in touch in campaigns. But coming out of this meeting, I think we do need to think and put our heads together to work out what campaign structures we need to build to actually help build a broader mass movement. Now, we know there are massive Invasion Day rallies every year. And from time to time, there have been, a lot of them have been a bit spontaneous though, protests around Black Lives Matter and sometimes around deaths in custody. But we actually do need to create more organisations, and there's a need for organisations, and people are, organising campaigns through the First Nations movement, but also I think amongst allies and supporters, we need to work out how we can plug in, because often we're a bit acting as individuals. So I think we need, coming out of this and through this year, we need to work out how to build stronger structures so we can build that movement on the streets in a more ongoing way to take up things like the bail laws, because also First Nations activists can't do everything. But we need to work out how we can support, like what's the best ways of supporting without treading on toes, but actually really practically supporting this movement. So I think, and there are people from a lot of different areas who are interested in supporting First Nations rights. So I'd really urge people to stay in touch. We want to do something. We don't want all of these issues pushed off the agenda, regardless of whether you think at the end of the day you need to vote yes or no in the constitutional referendum. We need to mobilise around treaty and all of the issues we've been talking about tonight, regardless of how you think you need to vote at the end of the day in the constitutional referendum. And we know we have to think about questions of the racists getting a bigger toehold in the working class movement, because state of consciousness of working class people is really important for treaty and winning rights across the board. But the comment that Lydia made early about the movements working together is important, because it's that solidarity between the movements that also helps us win. So we need to take some of that discussion into the union movement, which is very heavily influenced by the Labor Party. And at the moment, it's mostly at a structural level, organising around the yes to the voice. But we want them to take action around all these other issues. So that's our job in front of us. And in Socialist Alliance, we're committed to doing whatever we can to support and support Lydia, but also whatever campaign initiatives come up that can help really build this movement. So I'd just like to thank Lydia and Uncle Gary. It's a shame that he couldn't stay on for the rest of the meeting, but we're going to be doing a podcast with Uncle Gary. He is a huge wealth of knowledge in this movement. as Lydia can vouch for. So a huge thanks to our speakers. Thanks for coming, and stay in touch.